This video introduces you to the basic EMG application's audio feedback capabilities. Using audio feedback allows you to train without looking at the screen. So for example, you could have your eyes closed, or you could train in the context of some activity such as reading. There are three kinds of audio feedback: tone, midi, and threshold. The controls are found at the bottom right of the application's window. Each of the three has an on-off button and a volume slider. Threshold-based feedback involves configuring the threshold using these controls. First, we'll cover tone feedback. This button activates a tone whose pitch varies with muscle tension. This slider controls the volume. Pitch varies over a fixed range, that is, there's a maximum and minimum pitch. You can select the EMG range which corresponds to this pitch range using this control. It's analogous to the range control of the graphical display. Using a lower range gives you more sensitive feedback, so small changes are exaggerated, but the drawback is that the signal can easily go above the upper limit of the range. The EMG signal is averaged to make the variation smoother. You can set the level of averaging using this control. Let's move on to MIDI feedback. It works pretty much the same way. You turn it on using this button and change the volume using this slider. It plays a piano note repeatedly whose pitch varies with muscle tension. As with tone feedback, there's a fixed pitch range, and you can set the EMG range that it corresponds to using the same control. The same level of averaging or smoothing that you use with tone feedback also applies to MIDI feedback. Lastly, we'll cover threshold-based feedback. The idea of this feedback is that whenever the EMG signal crosses a threshold, a sound is triggered. By default it's a bell sound, but you could set up a different sound. See the user guide for details on how to do that. You activate threshold-based feedback with this button and control its volume with this slider. The threshold itself is set using these controls. This bar controls the actual level of the threshold. You can drag it with your mouse to change it. You can set the feedback to sound either when the signal goes above the limit or below it. I think most typically you'll want to set it to above so that the feedback warns you when you've tightened up. Use this control to set the condition. The threshold has its own average control. It works like the average control of the graphical display. That is, it sets the level of smoothing. Using a lower setting means that the feedback is faster to respond, but it's also more variable. You can set a sort of delay on the feedback using this control. If I set it to say 2 seconds, that means that the signal must stay above threshold for 2 seconds before the sound comes in. If it crosses the threshold and then goes back again before the 2 seconds is up, then no feedback will sound. This feature allows you to filter out changes of short duration, which you may regard as not really significant, for example brief deliberate movements or swallowing. You can choose to apply the threshold to both tone and MIDI feedback. To do this, check either of these checkboxes. So for example, if you're using tone feedback and you've set the threshold condition to above, then the tone will cut out whenever the EMG signal drops below the threshold. See the application's user guide for more details of audio feedback.